for what might be the very last time. Chapter 1. Glastonbury, December. Zac's Croft was possibly Ivy McFarlane's favourite place on earth. If she closed her eyes really, really tightly and thought about it, she might actually be there, walking along the lane with that discreet sign made out of polished onyx at the end of it. OK, maybe being blown along the lane with the winds coming off the sea, and then looking up to see the looming black shapes of the Cullen Mountains as she walked along that path on the Isle of Skye. So was Skye her favourite place? She wasn't sure. Surprisingly, and she never thought she would have admitted it, and as magical and beautiful as it was, Glastonbury didn't feel like home at all, even though she had been here for 8 months. It just lacked a certain something. And that certain something was a quiet, creative man with light brown hair that he always forgot to cut, the happiest, softest, darkest eyes she had ever seen, and a smile that could cut through the Scottish mists. That man was Zac Fallon, her ex-boss, her good friend, and a man she thought she was missing more than she considered possible. She'd come down here from Skye to try and carve out a new life for herself, to set up her own little creative business, to have a little studio she could call her own, where she could sell her handmade jewellery and artwork, something she had done quite successfully on Skye, where she was living quite happily in a rented cottage. She'd experimented with gemstone and crystal jewellery, and even progressed to making cakes for Zac's tea room. But she'd dreamed of coming back to Glastonbury ever since she'd worked here a few years ago, and at that time she felt it was the only place she'd ever want to be. But Zac had changed all that. Once she'd begun to work for him, to get to know him properly, the Glasto dreams had begun to fade into a pretty background, almost a watercolour wash over handmade paper, rather than the bright, gaudy, primary-coloured canvas it had been for so long. But she had to do it. Zac, she knew, wasn't the best at making his intentions clear. He wasn't the best at showing how he felt. She'd begun to believe he might have had feelings for her, but despite her trying to make it easy for him, trying to drop the biggest hints possible that she might, just might, feel the same, Zac had remained sweet and lovely, yet unforthcoming. Until she had, one day, decided to give up. And he'd almost said it. He'd almost confessed. He'd got grumpy and didn't want to believe that she was actually going, and she'd even told him that it might not be forever, hoping that he'd try harder to stop her. But he hadn't. For the umpteenth time, a version of their conversation replayed in her head, when she'd first told him she was considering it.
What? Glastonbury? You mean it? You're going?
Aye, I am going, Zac. I've told you several times and I'm not changing my mind. Do I have to hand an official letter in, and how much notice do I have to give?
I don't want to accept your notice or your letter. I don't want you heading to Glasgow.
Maybe it won't be forever, Zac. Maybe I just have to do this, just to try it. I might yet come back.
I'll miss you.
And I'll miss you, but we'll survive. But that was it. He'd had an odd look in his eyes, and she'd hoped so very much he'd argue more for her to stay, to tell her how he felt, not just leave it at, "I'll miss you." But he hadn't. And if Zac couldn't express how he felt, if he couldn't just convince her that he wanted her to stay on Skye, she was definitely going to leave. After all, she still wasn't entirely sure if she'd been imagining his feelings towards her. So here she was, in Glastonbury. But he was still in Skye. And that didn't feel very good either. She turned over, unable to sleep, and her foot connected with the back of the sofa bed. She pulled herself into a little ball, away from the edge, feeling pretty disloyal that she was thinking about Zac Fallon when she was in Gideon Austen's home. She owed Gid a lot, really. He was the one who had found her the workspace in Glastonbury, but he had perhaps been a little sparing with the truth when he said it would be her space and her space alone. She shared it with a tarot reader, a mindfulness coach, and, worst of all, another jewellery maker. A jewellery maker who had a much better footfall than she did. Morgana was situated right